If you're on Facebook too much, like me, perhaps you have noticed recently that something very odd is beginning to turn up in your newsfeed. In these instances, you will see a post from someone you don't know, and someone that you would never likely be friends with after you actually read the post. And the reason that you're seeing this offensive post is because one of your friends decided that they needed to correct someone who was wrong on the internet. Now, I say this without any judgment because in the not too distant past, I was that person who had to be out there correcting everybody who was wrong on the internet, so I can empathize. However, after years of inner work, I am now not the person who has to correct all of the wrongs I perceive around me. I have trained myself at least 99% of the time to just keep scrolling. Apparently, there is some algorithmic change that Facebook has recently made, and it is ostensibly to create more engagement among its members. However, what it seems to be truly accomplishing is simply to turn up the volume on the already cacophonous level of outrage that has been permeating this social platform probably since the day it began. What this algorithm is trying to do is to draw you back into arguments that you may have decided before that you don't want to be part of anymore. It's like putting a piece of King's Hawaiian bread in front of someone on keto. And believe me, I know the strength of that temptation. Lee brought King's Hawaiian to the last open mic, and I kept walking by it going, oh, God. Get behind me, Satan. I've been handling this in 2 stages. First, I see which one of my knuckleheaded friends is still arguing with a brick wall. I pray for your souls. And 2, I click on the 3 little buttons in the right-hand corner of the post, and I tell Facebook to never, ever, 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 ever show me posts from this person again. It's kind of like playing whack-a-mole, but it's a game of training the algorithm that these are not fertile fishing waters for its insidious game of luring people back into pointless arguments on social media. But do not think that this move by Facebook is random. They know exactly what they're doing. The Wall Street Journal recently did a 3-part series on the tactics that Facebook has been using over the years to get us all addicted to its platform and engage in endless hours of doom scrolling and useless bickering. Back in 2018, according to this report, a new algorithm was introduced that corporate leaders hoped would make Facebook, don't laugh, but they were hoping to make Facebook a kinder, gentler place. Right. That's funny. Well, the newspaper's investigation of Facebook and their internal communications around this algorithm change found, of course, it did just the opposite. It made the platform noisier. It made it even more fuller of more outrage, more misinformation, probably to the surprise of no one who is not a corporate Facebook leader. But in a metaphysical sense, Facebook really is simply a metaphor for the ego-driven world that we live in. The ego knows it has no power over you unless it can deeply engage you in feelings of outrage, feelings of anger, or shame, or fear, or continuous grievances. If it sees you slipping from its grip, say, getting into meditation more, taking more walks in nature, connecting deeply with your friends or your spiritual practices, it will rejigger the algorithms. And it will seek new ways to pull you back into the darkness of its cacophonous chaos. Listen to what the ego says, our reading from A Course in Miracles tells us, and see what it directs you to see. And it is sure that you will see yourself as tiny, vulnerable, and afraid. And that's everybody on Facebook. Tiny. All social media. Tiny, vulnerable, afraid. And this jubilance, it is all by design. But here's the good news. There are 2 selves inside your head. There is the tiny, vulnerable, and fearful ego self. But there is also that higher divine self that is constantly listening for the voice for God, and we have a choice which voice we pay attention to. If we pay attention to that one that is attuned to the voice for God, the Holy Spirit that speaks with that still small voice, if we really listen to it and for it, it will not be drowned out by all the ego's raucous screams and senseless ravings, as the Course calls it. And we will hear it because we want to hear it. Here's the key, according to the Course: for on the voice you choose to hear and on the sights you choose to see depends entirely on your whole belief in what you are. And Jubilants, I would submit to you this morning that the reason that our world seems especially noisy these days is that we have forgotten what and who we truly are. We are not vulnerable and tiny and fearful. We are the light of the world. We are God's eternal child. When we forget that there are two selves within each of us, it's easier to pay attention to the loud, noisy part that grabs our attention right up front with its raucous screams and senseless ravings. However, I think the increased volume of outrage and grievance in our time is also occurring because more and more and more of us are remembering who we are. We are remembering what we are, and we are seeking to tune that out. We want to turn our attention inward. We want to learn to be still. And the ego, though, like Facebook, is madly trying any and all algorithms it can think of to keep our attention on its raucous screams and its senseless ravings. So many of us on Facebook are trying. We're trying to curate this world, a bubble, if you like, of like-minded spirits that lift each other up. In the Course's terms, we're trying to create a happy dream right there on the screen. But you know, that doesn't serve the ego's purpose at all, so it just jacks up the volume. Make it noisier so they can't hear the voice for God. So Jubilants, we have a choice. We can keep doom scrolling through our own patterns, our own issues and grievances and fear, or we can see through this cacophonous chaos to that holy stillness, that silence that beckons us to listen to it every single moment of the day. And this silence, that's that field beyond right doing and wrongdoing that Muslim mystic poet Rumi talks about. This is the silence where the holy lives. This silence is where our sense of separation falls apart and we understand there's only one of us here. We see through this darkness and into that silence by doing one thing, just one thing on a regular basis. Any ideas? Shut up. Be quiet. The universe is giving us that message right now, loud and clear. A huge, seemingly never-ending pandemic has forced all of us, well, most of us, to cover our mouths. Maybe all these masks are the Holy's way of telling us to shush. Stop talking so much. Start listening more deeply. Not just for the voice of God in our own bodies, but for the voice of God that speaks all through those around us. Perhaps especially those with whom our ego wants to endlessly argue. Instead of participating in the loud cacophony of chaos, adding our voices to the outrage, what if this is the time that we should be practicing silence? What if this is our moment to finally learn to be still? Maybe this time is not about having our voices heard, but having God's voice heard, first deeply within ourselves, and then out in the world when we speak those words of love that we have heard within. What if it's time, Jubilants, to train the algorithm of our ego, that we ain't taking the bait of its fear and outrage anymore? Breathe deeply. It's so tempting to play the ego's game. I mean, it makes it seem like so much fun, right? You get to be right, or feel right anyway. But we can escape its clutches if we follow Jesus' example. In our reading from the Jesus story today, we find our guy before Herod. He's being tried for sedition because people had become outraged by his brand of activism. And this is what our ego does. It creates so much outrage in the world that anyone who dares to not join in on that fearful fun will get put on trial in some way or another, jeered at or dismissed as someone who doesn't care enough. You're not paying attention. If you're not angry, you're not paying attention. So we get accused of not caring enough to be angry and afraid. So the scripture tells us that Herod, he was happy to see Jesus. He hoped that Jesus would do some sort of trick, give us a sign before the assembly. Maybe Herod was hoping that Jesus would get angry and bring down the wrath of God on his accusers. And that's just like our ego. When it puts us on trial, boy, it hopes to. It baits us with that fear and outrage, and it hopes that we will lose our connection to spirit, lash out against it. And that'll put us right back in the clutches of the ego. We're right back in engaging with its game. The algorithm wins again. But Jesus doesn't do that. The scripture says he remained silent. He answered the cacophonous chaos with stillness. And that's so hard for us. We want to defend ourselves. We want to make the case that we're right, everybody else is wrong. And Jesus, though, in that moment, Jesus knew that no matter what he said or did, he'd just be playing the ego's game. He's teaching us to remain still and not engage with the ego's algorithm. And no matter what Jesus did in this moment before Herod, his fate was pretty much sealed. But we're no different. Our fate is sealed as well. The ego is always, in every moment, seeking to crucify you, to keep you trapped in a game of fear that wants to kill your spirit, and there is no way to talk your way out of it. You just get deeper if you start talking. Life in the spirit, though, it is kind of like Facebook. It is. Jesus curated a community. Perhaps in the end, they probably weren't the best 12 guys, but but they carried his message to this day. We're still talking about the dude, so it worked out pretty well, right? But Jesus also just kept scrolling in many cases. He just refused to engage with the algorithms that sought to draw him into conflict with others. Now, the big difference between Jesus and us, though, is that he didn't exclude those from his community who disagreed with him or resisted him. Instead, he sought to see through their cacophonous chaos of darkness to the light that was within them. And he invites us to do the same, to curate a community of love around us, but not to exclude those who we feel would oppose us. Instead, like Jesus, the Holy invites us to see so deeply into their darkness that eventually all we can perceive is their light. And yeah, if they're doing bad things in the world, right, you gotta work to mitigate the damage that they're doing, the suffering that they're creating for themselves and others. But as the Course tells us, only appreciation is what we should have for our holy siblings, even those who are so engaged in the ego's game that they don't understand the harm that they may be causing to themselves and others. As Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh reminds us, the secret of creating peace is that when you listen to another person, you have only one purpose: to offer them an opportunity to empty their heart. Now, it's easy to hold space for people that we love, to allow them that safe space to empty their heart. But how often can we be open enough to allow even those we may perceive as enemies to feel safe enough to empty their heart to us? That's not easy. But that's our challenge, to be so attuned to that voice for God that we can become a place of comfort and safety for even those that our egos would condemn and judge as evil or separate from ourselves. They're not like us at all. If we want to create peace, though, we must learn to be still, even in the face of outrage. We must learn to become a space that is so open to everyone we meet that miracles naturally occur, because we have remembered that we are the light of the world, and they are too. All of our readings today, Jubilants, They all agree. The key to seeing through this cacophonous chaos of this world is to approach each moment with awareness and the perception of who and what you truly are. Hans says, if you are able to keep this awareness and compassion alive in you, then you can sit for 1 hour and listen even if the other person's speech contains a lot of wrong perceptions, condemnations, and bitterness. You can continue to listen because you are already protected by the nectar of compassion in your own heart. And this is the awareness, the compassion that Jesus practiced as he stood before Herod. This is the awareness that the Course encourages us to have when we listen to the still small voice of God instead of the raucous voice of the ego. Perception, the Course reminds us, is a choice, not a fact. The ego world does not have to dictate how we perceive things. We, jubilants, have the vision of God, which means we can see in the dark. We have the ability to see light everywhere, even in a soul that we perceive to be the darkest on earth. We cannot use that perception, though, if we're too busy babbling on and on and on and just adding our ego voice to all of this cacophonous chaos of the world. So first step, what was it? Shut up. Be quiet. Learn to be still. We have to stop thinking that adding our ego's voice to this cacophony out here will do anything to change the world. It is instructive to note that when Jesus finally does speak after his trial, he only speaks words of forgiveness. He forgives the thieves on either side of him as he hangs on the cross. He forgives those who put him on the cross in the first place. And this is where we all must arrive, at that holy forgiveness that literally will save the world. And we don't get there by talking. We don't get there by posting on Facebook, arguing with people. We get there by loving. We get there by forgiving. We get there by refusing to engage in the ego's game of fear and grievance and outrage. We get there by being still and becoming aware of which self it is we are really listening to in any moment of our lives. Are we listening to that loud, raucous self of fear? Or are we tuned in to that still, small voice for God, that higher, divine self of love? Thich Nhat Hanh says, keeping your awareness keeps you safe, but the Course says it does more than that. Awareness ends the separation because it makes us realize that there's only one of us here, that no mind is separate. Our higher divine self knows that. So when a miracle changes our perception and we see the light that shines even through the darkness of this cacophonous chaos, then the collective mind that we all share changes because there's only one of us here. There's a moon inside every human being, writes Rumi. Learn to be companions with it. Give more of your life to this listening. As brightness is to time, so you are to the one who talks to the deep ear in your chest. I should sell my tongue and buy 1,000 ears when that one steps near and begins to speak. I invite you, jubilants, sell your tongue. Buy yourself 1,000 ears. Stop talking so much and start listening deeply to the silence that is always here in every present moment. It has so much wisdom, so much peace, so much joy and love to share if only we would learn to be still and give our life to this kind of listening. If we seek the moon inside everyone, that reflected light of love that creates all of us, then we can choose to scroll through that holy news feed of love, which reaffirms the truth about us. We are the light of the world. We are the innocent child of God. And so is everyone else. When that is our perception of this world, then the one mind that we all are will get to say, oh yeah.